Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 364 for the 27th of Cheshvan in a leap year. So we all know that one of the worst insults that you can tell a man is to call him a mama's boy, right? And women are usually don't find this trait very attractive if a man is a mama's boy. This doesn't mean that a guy shouldn't be close to his mother. I mean, that's a very nice thing to be close to your mother, but to be so close to your mother that you're so like a mama's boy sort of implies this idea that you're so attached to your mother that you don't have room. Your mother takes precedence over any other woman in your life, which is not so healthy, right? Like we know, even according to Torah, there's a principle, there's the first commandment really that was really ever given is for a man to leave his mother and find a wife. The idea of pru urvu, like being fruitful and multiply, which by implication means going out and finding a wife. So today, believe it or not, in today's Tanya, we're actually going to be exploring the spiritual dimension of being a mama's boy, what that's all about, that there's actually a spiritual counterpart in the spiritual realms within the spheros of this idea of a mama's boy, and kind of help us understand this a little bit, because the truth is, if you think about it, it's it actually makes a lot of sense to be a mama's boy, because your mother is the one who gave birth to you, right? Like, who is more important to you than your mother? Your mother is the source of your very life. So it's only natural for a son to feel extremely close to their mother and feel so dependent on their mother in that way. However, what is it about this trait then that's so unattractive to us women when we see somebody who's a mama's boy? Like, why is it that we think of this as an insult? Is because really what the basic implication is on a deeper level of what a mama's boy is that this is somebody who is more interested in taking and receiving nurturance from his mother versus somebody who's interested in giving. Because once a man gets married, this is a big step. This is basically the step of him becoming a man. And what that implies is that he's no longer there. Of course, in marriage, there's give and take all the time. But when a man goes out and he seeks a wife and he says, I'm ready to get married, what he's really saying is, I'm ready to make space for someone else in my life and to give to another woman in my life, to give rather than to receive. And so as we'll learn in today's Tanya, it's really deep stuff and it's quite Kabbalistic, so bear that in mind. We're going to be learning about this, how this applies to the world that we live in and to the physical performance of the mitzvahs, in fact. And why the physical performance of the mitzvahs are so essential to keeping the world intact and to keeping the world functioning and to bringing about God's ultimate purpose, which is that it should not be a space of just receiving, but actually it should be a space where the spiritual energies give to the world, bring God down into the world. In other words, the point of creation is not just for everything to remain in the spiritual realms, but rather God wants a dwelling place down here in this physical realm. So with that being said, let's get into the way that Alter Rebbe explains this. And again, for reference, we've begun a new section of the Tanya. This section is called Kuntres Acharon, the final letters, the final pamphlet. And this is a selection of essays, of short letters that the Alter Rebbe wrote dealing with quite profound Kabbalistic ideas. Sometimes it's there to kind of elaborate on different Kabbalistic ideas. Sometimes the Alter Rebbe comes to resolve different seeming contradictions that seem to come up between Kabbalah, between different Sfarim and Kabbalah, or in something he wrote that comes up in Tanya versus the way something's explained in elsewhere in different Kabbalistic farm and things like that. So today we're going to be examining the second essay in Kuntres Acharon. And today we're going to be examining a particular teaching from a sefer of the Arizal called the Acharon that teaches this idea that there's this certain supernal unification of male and female energies on high, which are referred to as like a face-to-face kind of unification, that this can only happen by virtue of mitzvos. How mitzvos are absolutely essential for this face-to-face unification of the man and the woman to happen. There's an illustration of this whole idea in the actual story of creation when you look in Bereshit, where it describes the creation of man and woman, of Adam and Chava, and commentators discuss this creation of man and woman, and there's an idea, at least among some commentators, that originally man and woman were actually created connected as one being, and then they were split apart. And in being connected as one being, according to the Kabbalists, they actually were connected in a back-to-back fashion. So yes, they were unified. Yes, they were one, but they were one they couldn't see each other. They were in a back-to-back way. And only after being separated were they able to face each other face-to-face. So today we're going to be exploring this whole idea in a deeper way and why the mitzvahs are so important and so essential to this process of these two forces being separated from being back to back and being able to unify in a face way. And why is it that God couldn't just create them face to face to begin with? They could have just been unified, but in a face to face way. Like, wouldn't that be beautiful? This kind of like these two lovers just created in this beautiful, harmonious way. In fact, God created them in a back to back way. And what is that all about? So the way to understand this is that the Acharon discusses this. It discusses about this whole idea about the back-to-back creation. And in the Acharon, it actually describes that the reason why is because in creating the world, there are many forces at play. Many of these forces are godly and good, but there's a great dose of negative forces. And we've talked elsewhere as to the purpose of these negative forces and why God chose for them to be there. But an easy way to reference them is calling them the klipos, the husks, which conceal God from the world, conceal godliness from the world. And these klipos, they suckle their energy from holiness, as we said. And so they're sort of like always on the loose, sort of looking for things to attach to. And and as it's described in the Acharon, it talks about this idea that if one of the reasons why, or perhaps the main reason why, God did not create Adam and Chava face to face, the male and female in this face to face way, but yet unified, is that then the energy would be too powerful, and this powerful energy would just be free flowing. And then these klipos, these negative husks, it would be too easy for them to suckle from these energies. So that's the only way that it like the safe way basically to bring about these energies into the world is that it had to be in this back-to-back way. It had to be in this way that's like not super direct. I know these ideas are kind of abstract, so just take from it as much as you can, and follow along the text. But these ideas are very Kabbalistic, and as much as we can try to understand them on some level, no matter how much I try to explain these on a simplistic way, there's always going to be this level of like, this is just really out there, really abstract. So bear that in mind. Okay. So now we're going to understand why it is that, okay, yes, so they were created in this back-to-back way, but the ultimate purpose is for them to be face-to-face, right? Like we see even in the story of creation, ultimately they were separated and then they were created in a face-to-face way. So how does this happen? So the Acharon teaches that this specifically happens through physical mitzvahs that we do, through physical good actions. So why? And why is this the case? Why does it have to be specifically physical action, specifically like action-oriented mitzvahs? Like you would think, maybe if just through meditation and contemplation and the proper intent, this might bring about this reorganization of the forces. But in fact, it has to be through physical action. Why? Okay. So a couple things. So all of this, bear in mind, is taken from the Acharon, and this part is coming from the 44th and the 45th gate, the Shar Mem Dalet and Mem Nun, that first of all, in order for this unification to happen, there has to be an elevation of what are known as the Main Nukvin, the feminine waters, which is these are the feminine aspect of the Zer Anpin, the feminine aspect of the emotive attributes. So an easy parallel to understand this in our world is just that, if you want to, we've talked about this elsewhere in the podcast as well. If you want male and female to unite, if you want there to be this, simple a guy and a girl to date, even though it seems like the guy is often the initiator, the woman really ultimately has to initiate her receptiveness. She has to show that she's available, that she's open. And by doing that, that's what we know as the elevation of the feminine waters in Kabbalah, the elevation of the Mayin Nukvin. So it's like, okay, our goal is ultimately to unite these two forces of the male and female. So the first thing that needs to happen is there needs to be this elevation, this receptivity of the feminine waters. And the femininity is associated with asiyah. Femininity is associated with action. Physicality is feminine. Action is feminine. All of that stuff is feminine. And all of this is explained in the Acharon in chapter 1. And so And now not only that, so that's one thing, is that there needs to be this elevation of the feminine waters, and the feminine waters is asiyah, is action. Another thing to know is that action, good deeds, the way that good deeds are referred to is as being kisuach v'kitzut hakotzim, which means the trimming and hacking off of thistles. So what does that mean? That means that basically, like as we described, they're in the spiritual realms, and kind of like this original place of spiritual realms, there's lots of forces and everything is really chaotic there. There's good, there's bad, it's all over the place. And the power of physical action is what it does, is that this physical action actually, it like serves as like a weed cutter. It goes around cutting off these thistles, cutting off the negative parts. And this cutting off, this is an action oriented thing. This is like, you picture like someone in the field chopping off weeds in the fields. And this is written about in the Acharon, also in the 47th gate in chapter 5. So now, what does this mean? What is this pruning off effect? This happens, and why does this have to do with action? Is because this is where, when we're involved, we've spoken about this again in Tanya many times, when we're involved in physical things, what we're doing is we're being involved here in the physical world with a physical object. So like, let's say if you take, let's say you take like a Shabbos candle, right? So let's say you're going to light Shabbos candle. So that candle that you have, that's what we can think of as being klipas noga. That's a type of translucent klipa that can go either way. That candle could, God forbid, you could use that candle to burn down a house, right? God forbid. Hopefully you'll never do that. Or you can use it to light a candle before Shabbos and sanctify the Shabbos with it. So when you use that candle in that holy way, what's happening is that you're actually clarifying what's going on in that candle. You're clarifying, you're taking the good of the candle, using it for a mitzvah, and you're elevating it away from the negative potential that candle might have, the physical gashmius of that candle, so that the negative gets pushed away, the negative gets cut off. So you're sort of weeding in that way, you're pruning, right? And the good within that candle, the good of any physical mitzvah that you do, gets elevated up to its source in Atzilus, because in Atzilus it's already been refined, this goodness, so it just reverts back to its source. Okay, so now the Alter Rebbe asks a question. This is all well and fine, that okay, now we can understand this a little bit, why it is that physical actions specifically, so again, to reiterate, the reason why physical actions specifically are necessary in order to create this unification face to face on high, so that they're no longer back to back, is because first of all, physicality is feminine, and so when you engage in physical action, that's like the elevation of the feminine waters, and that elevation of the feminine waters is a lifting up process that's going to like sort of arouse the female to arouse the male to want to unite with it. And then the second thing that happens is that physicality is associated with klipas noga. So in physicality, what you're doing is you're actually separating the good from the bad, so that the good now can get elevated out of the bad, and we chopped off the bad. So now we don't have to worry about the bad attaching itself to the good in this way. But now the Alter Rebbe asks a question about all this. So then, if it's true that we need this physical action in order to accomplish this, why do we see that it's actually taught that that Adam Harishon, the first man, he was actually able to accomplish what's known as tikkun, or rectification, through prayer? So prayer is not really a physical thing, right? There's something very different about prayer versus lighting a Shabbos candle versus putting on tefillin, right? But the Alter Rebbe specifies it's actually not that different, because as we've learned, the main thing with prayer, the important part of prayer, is that you move your lips. It's not enough to just think the words in your heart. You actually have to move your lips while you pray. And when moving your lips, this constitutes a deed. This is an action. And so because the lips receive the vitality from the body and from the blood that's going through your body, which all of this stuff comes from Noga, comes from Klipas Noga. So it's the same thing. So even if we're talking about prayer, the prayer of Adama Rishon, it was still a physical action. And that's why it was able to accomplish this. And these birurim, these clarifications that happen that you accomplish through doing these physical actions, these physical mitzvahs, this causes that the Asiya lifts up to Yetzirah through the name of Ban, through which is one of the names of God. We don't have to get into that right now. And then through that name, using the name of Ban, it goes from Asiya to Yetzirah, which is the world right above it, from Yetzirah to Bria, which is the world above that, and then finally to Atzilus, as is explained all in the 45th gate. In the Drush Yud Aleph Siman Vav. So he's just giving like a footnote of where all of this is found. And so this is how we can understand that thought does not actually accomplish anything. You need that action. So even if you sit and meditate and try to, purify the world with your thoughts, so to speak, it's not going to do anything because you need the physical action. You need that Mayin Nukvin, the feminine waters that comes from the kings of Noga. And the interesting thing is that the low connects to the high, so that you actually need this Mayin Nukvin, this lowest waters, these physical waters, in order to tap into something which is above both of these forces, above the male and female forces. And that's the only way that we can draw down the drop above in order to accomplish this union on high. A way to kind of understand this in kind of like a physical way is that when we think about an actual union of a physical man and woman, like when a physical man and woman engage in intimacy and then a baby is born. So I was actually talking about this the other day with somebody, that it's like, we take it for granted. We take these things for granted. Two people get together, they're intimate and they have a child. And we're like, yeah, that's science. That's how it works. It's like, no, that's not science. Like, that's crazy. That's crazy that two people would get together and then a baby comes about from that, right? So the only way that could happen really is because when these two people unite, there's a force that's higher than them, we call it God, that actually intervenes and comes down and causes that child to come about through them. So similarly here too, in order for this face-to-face occurrence to happen, the male and the female to reunite in a face-to-face way, there has to be a higher energy that's tapped into. And that higher energy gets tapped into through the feminine waters, specifically through the physical action down here. Okay, and this is a very, very powerful thing because, and this is where we're going to get into the mama's boy thing, because the Alter Rebbe literally says, he says that that this force, this Zer Anpin, the masculine end of the deal, the masculine half of the equation, wants to suckle from its mother, which its mother is Bina. Bina is the sphera from which it comes, and not to influence down below. So it's very comfortable for the masculine energy, for the Zer Anpin, to be attached to Bina, to just stay there, be attached to Bina, and that's it, and not influence down here. And this is written about also in the Eitz Chaim in Shar 45 in the second drush. So basically there's this idea that it's very comfortable. The kind of like easier state for Zer Anpin to be in is to just like ascend back up to its source, to be attached to its mother, which is Bina. But really the whole purpose of creation is not for just that ascension. It's actually to come down and be in this physical world. And so the only way that can happen is through physical mitzvahs, because the physical mitzvahs are that Mayin Nukvin that arouse. It's sort of like a way you can think about it is that in a very simplistic way is that you have a mama's boy. How do you get the mama's boy to go away from his mother? Is if another woman is attractive enough that she allures him away from his mother. And she's like, come with me, and makes it so appealing that he's actually going to want to give to her, that he's going to want to move away from his mother and give to his wife. Again, it doesn't mean he has to cut off ties completely with his mother. It just means that his orientation is going to be towards giving to his wife, as opposed to he's no longer receiving from his mother in the same way. And so this is the idea of when we do physical mitzvahs, this is what it accomplishes. It accomplishes this elevation of the Mayin Nukvin and the weeding off of the negative forces that did not let this be possible to begin with. Sort of like, again, in the human analogy, why don't babies get married, right? There has to be a certain amount of preparation. A man has to be ready to get married. So there has to be this like time and place. Like if two babies were to get married, it wouldn't be so productive. It wouldn't be so good. We have to get to the point where a man marries a woman who's mature enough to be able to like sort through the chaos, so to speak, to be able to have a healthy relationship with, is the kind of imagery that I'm picturing in my mind. Okay, now the Alter Rebbe concludes this whole idea by citing from the Zohar in Parshas Pekudai, page 244b, which says that in addition to just to praying, one way that it's referred to is that there's this idea of gazing. That it talks about how there's a certain gazing that can also accomplish this union on high. What is this gazing? What is this a reference to? This is a reference to having a very intense type of kavana in prayer, very intense type of intention in prayer, different types of supernal unions. And this is only applicable for those who know how to gaze, so to speak, or in Hebrew, istakla. To look, like to look very intensely. And so this is not for the average person. This is for certain types of people, very, very special people who their nefesh, ruach, and neshama, their aspects of their soul are themselves the mind nukvin. Like they're so refined because they are in such a state of self-sacrifice, of mesiras nefesh for Torah. And during Tachnun prayer and the Nefilat Apayim, like they're so basically given over to God that they merely through their gaze, they're able to accomplish this thing, which most of us, the vast majority of us, need to do through action, through either praying with using our mouth, like moving our mouths, or actual physical action. So that's the conclusion of this section. I hope that was interesting to you. Again, these essays are very abstract. I am very aware of that, and I'm trying as best as I can to bring them down for you and make them as applicable as they can be. So hopefully it's accomplishing that somewhat. And so with that being said, we will continue tomorrow when we get into the third essay of Kuntres Acharon, and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.